Hi everyone, I'm Susan Mulvihill and welcome back to my vegetable garden. Yep, I'm out here again today because I am going to plant some potatoes and some lettuce, and I have a lot of tips to share with you. So let's start with the potatoes. Potatoes are really fun and easy to grow once you understand a few of the basics. And the first thing you need to be aware of is that you should start with seed potatoes. You can find them at garden centers and online, and they are certified to be disease-free, which is very important when you're growing potatoes. Now what I used to do is I used to buy really large seed potatoes, and I would cut them into chunks. And I would make sure that each chunk had at least 2 eyes on them. And eyes are those depressions in potatoes where the sprouts come out. And then what you do is you spread them out on some sheets of newspaper and let them dry overnight, or at least for several hours before planting them. And that's so they can scab over basically and hopefully not rot in the soil. But I would still have some problems with rotting. So quite a few years ago, I switched to buying small seed potatoes, and so I plant them whole, and that way there's no cuts in them, and so way less chance of rotting, and it makes no difference on the size potato that you end up harvesting in the fall. So that's my tip to you, is to go with small ones if you can. Now, just like in last week's video when I was planting carrots and onions, I have prepared the soil in this bed very similarly. I'm using a spading fork, and all I'm doing is pressing the tines down into the soil, wiggling it a little bit, pulling it up, finding another spot nearby, pushing it in, wiggling it, pulling it up, and so on. And that is because I want to be very protective of the soil structure, which is so important. So the next thing we get to do is plant our seed potatoes. So the first thing that I did for our own setup is I put our drip irrigation system back on top of this raised bed. This year we're growing Viking Purple and Yukon Gold, which are our 2 favorite varieties of potatoes. And I had 10 of each. So what I've done is, first of all, I've spaced them about a foot from the edge of the raised bed, and then 10 to 12 inches apart. And what you do is you just take a trowel and dig a hole about 6 inches deep. Place the potato in the bottom. If you have any sprouts already coming out, just point them upward. And that's all there is to it. Pretty simple. Now that all of the seed potatoes have been planted, I have a few more things I wanted to cover with you. The first thing I'm going to do is place a 1/2 inch layer of compost onto the surface of this bed. Now, you know, potatoes don't need a lot of any one particular nutrient. They really like a balance of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And since my compost is a lovely blend of those 3, it's a perfect soil amendment for growing them in. The plants are going to love it. Now, what about water? As I mentioned earlier, we have a drip irrigation system, and so we do water them, but not a lot. Potatoes don't really need that much water, but you obviously want to water them enough so that the plants grow okay. Also, if you think you're going to forget what type of potato you're growing, don't forget to put a label on the bed. And then the last thing, which is absolutely the most important to me, is mulch. Have you ever eaten a potato, or you've peeled a potato and you see a lot of green on it? That is called solanine, and it's considered a harmful substance. The way it occurs is if potatoes are growing along the surface of the bed and the sun hits them, that's what causes this naturally occurring substance to be manufactured in the potatoes. The easiest solution is to put a few inches of mulch over the bed for the entire season, and that way the sun can't hit the potatoes. So you could use grass clippings from an untreated lawn, you could use shredded leaves, you could use straw, anything along those lines will keep that from happening with your potatoes. Okay, let's plant some lettuce. Now, after all of the information I've given you about growing potatoes, you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, how hard is it to grow lettuce? Fortunately, lettuce is very easy to grow. And one of the great things about it is that it's tolerant of some shade. And you might note at the end of this bed, I have some late afternoon shade taking place. And that will not phase the lettuce in the least. So that is a really nice thing to know. This year, I'm growing 4 different types of lettuce: Little Gem, red salad bowl, red deer tongue, and flashy troutback. These are really cool varieties, and you'll find the hardest thing about growing lettuce is choosing from all of the wonderful varieties out there. Now, because I'm growing 4 different types in a bed, I have labels for each of the rows so I can keep an eye on how the individual types are doing. Now, to prepare this bed, once again, I used my spading fork to just gently soften the soil a little bit so that it will be easy to plant seeds on it. I have put the drip irrigation system back on this bed, and you'll notice it looks a little different from the potato one. That's because instead of running an extra line down here, my husband got some risers that will kind of spritz over this bed, and we've found for crops like lettuce, it really gives them the moisture that they need. So this can be adjusted with a little valve here, depending upon how much water we need to go onto the plants. I've taken the tip of an iron rake and made some little furrows for the 4 rows of lettuce. The next step is to plant the seeds. Okay, all of the lettuce seeds have been planted, and so the next step is to lightly and gently cover them with some soil from the edges of the furrow. Or you can try something that I do. I take a germination mix, which is a combination of peat moss and perlite. It's a very lightweight mix, and I just sprinkle it into the furrow at a depth of about 1/4 inch, maybe 1/8 inch, and that makes it really easy for the seeds to come up. After that, you need to water the seeds in to help them sprout. And one of the things I need to do is I'm going to put some hoops over this bed and some bird netting, because birds love to nibble on freshly sprouted seeds, at least in my garden, because I do have an awful lot of birds. You can probably hear them in the background. Another thing I'll be doing is once they have grown a little bit, I'm going to thin them so that the plants are maybe about 4 to 6 inches apart, depending upon the type of lettuce I'm growing. And I also will fertilize them with some fish fertilizer, and that is something that's like an emulsion. And what I do is I use half strength. So instead of 2 tablespoons to a gallon of water, I use 1 tablespoon to a gallon of water, and I'll fertilize the plants because they really need nitrogen to grow well. And that's all there is to it. I'll tell you what, it is such a treat to be out in the garden again and to see it start to take shape. I wanted to show you our garlic bed. We also have shallots in here, and we planted all of these last fall, which is the proper timing for growing them. And it's really neat to see these beautiful plants growing. I will see you back in the garden in a week.